Mike has 13 books of poetry, and his 14th book, which is his completed works, will be coming out in the next month or two from Spartan Press. He's in the middle of his proofing for that. So he's taught as poet in schools in Montana, and he's taught in school systems, other school systems, including university systems abroad in Latvia and Bosnia, and also in, as I said, now in Thailand. So with no further ado, he's going to help us understand what we learn about writing and how can we learn the work of writing and improve the work of writing. And he's going to do that with some, if our technology works, with a bunch of bells and whistles. Thank you, Mike.
Minimal bells and whistles, obviously. Thank you, Betsy. Hopefully they're not my complete poems. That means you're dead. And there'll be the collected poems, but I've got several other manuscripts that are on my desk or circulating, so it'll be collected, but there'll be more. How are you all doing? I was fortunate enough to, in 1971 or two, that shows how long it was. I can't remember exactly what year. To be at the University of Montana working on my on a master's in English. That was my dream. I did not know a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing even existed. And so I started taking classes. I started auditing some classes, and then one of the people I audited from said, why don't you take a class from Richard Hugo? Some of you perhaps have heard of Richard Hugo. He was the director of the creative writing program at the University of Montana. I went and I took this class from Richard Hugo, and it was very, I was young. I'd been writing for a while, and I was a little older than most of the other students, but not that much. And we went into we were in the seminar room of the Liberal Arts Building, and about 8 or 10 of us as students, and I was sitting at one end of the table, and Richard Hugo was down at the other end of the table, and other students filling in the other spaces. And you know, when you do a workshop, when you workshop your poem, you bring copies for everybody to read. And it can be, at least the first couple of times, sort of terrifying. Which is probably the understatement of the century, especially with Hugo, who I actually became good friends with him, especially starting with this moment I'm describing. And I read my poems. I had 3 poems, I think, and I read them aloud. They were very short, lyric poems. I read them aloud, and there was dead silence. You know, it was like, it was dead silence, and kind of like in here. And I thought, oh, I'm done for. You know, I'm going to have to go back to working on the grounds crew at the University of Montana, which I did anyway. But Dick Hugo had glasses, like the reading glasses, you know. So he's reading my poems, and he looks right over the top of his glasses and straight down at me. Glad you had your mask on. Thank you. And he said, the strangest question, he said, who are you? God, at that point in my life, I didn't know who I was, you know, 22 years old, 25 years old. And I didn't really know how to answer, and I just kind of explained, you know, my name is blah, 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 and I just, you know, Madeline DeFries said, but you know, to take your class, and he paid me very high compliments on the poems. Again, it was dead silence from the students. Nobody responded. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm just trying to get enough credits to get to be an in-state student, so I don't have to pay $10,000 extra." Anyway, he said, "Do you want to get into the MFA program and the graduate program?" And I said, "I never heard of it." And he said, "Well, do you want to be in it?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Go up to the administration building and get the paperwork done. Bring it back to me. I'm the director of the program. You are now in the graduate program, the MFA program in creative writing and poetry." You know, it was one of several ways I've gotten through into some good kind of miracles through the back door. So anyway, in '73, I got my MFA at the University of Montana. I wanted to, again, to start off, although I've already started off, I'm going to start off because these times are, you know, to say the least, kind of crazy, the times in which we are living. And very seldom do we hear much humor. I've been accused by my own wife of not writing funny poems. And you might agree with her after hearing this poem. But you, I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, Somali pirates were cruising the waters off the coast of their country. And they would attack nice looking yachts, or they would attack oil tankers or freighters and take them over and hijack them. And okay. And then the ships stopped going by Somalia. Good decision, right? Yeah, we're going to get hijacked. We might as well go another direction. So they stopped, and no more, you know, nice boats and yachts, and so they came through. So I read about this, and then I wrote the following poem about the Somali pirates and the impact, the devastating impact that had on the pirates. You ready for this? Yeah. Okay. There's a title to it. It says, "Somali pirates now facing boredom." Oh, thank you for laughing. And okay, and keep in mind that these folks are mostly Muslim, so Allah Akbar means God is great. Right? Okay, well, the first line is, "God is not so great. Not a ship in sight, and all these hostages to feed, and our wives. I can't even get in my boat to take a swing at the sea. No fuel and no ammunition. Spent it all stupidly shooting in the air at weddings and other parties. From now on, all celebrations are banned. Where's the rice and coffee? The cigarettes? My deck of cards?" You can tell everyone is getting just a little bit edgy. Just to glance at a long 30-footer with those clean white sails, spreading wide with invitation. A beauty like that would lift our spirits high. Speaking of wives, where are they? I've missed reading that poem out loud. It's fun to read. Okay, the work of poetry. And I know this is was advertised as a writing workshop. Well, ta-da, poetry is writing. And I originally asked for the title to be The Work of Poetry. But poets can learn from prose writers can learn from poets, nonfiction creative writers can learn from poets, and prose writers and creative writers. So there's lots of crossover. The work of poetry. So the emphasis of this workshop right now is the work that we as writers do in poetry as we write our poems. And a lot of people think that that poetry just comes kind of out of the atmosphere, comes, you know, from a satellite that's circling the planet, or it comes from some kind of muse. And that's possible, but I just remember the workshops with Dick Hugo. He had to work really hard, and if you didn't, that's when you felt the Mr. Orban in the classroom, the dictator in the classroom. He would let you know, and so you needed to work, and I'll explain what work is in a minute. There's also a poet by the name of John Clare, who is an English poet. He of the first half of the 19th century, and he has been called the peasant poet of England. He was about 5 feet tall. His health wasn't good. He, much to his family's regret, he never got a job. So he did what was called casual labor. He just got work where he could in the northeast of England. But he had poems in his head all the time. All the time he had poems in his head. And he's writing, he'll take his hat off and write the poem, or a line or a word in his hat, or whatever he had. Otherwise he'd forget it. But all the time he's working, he's also got these poems going in his head. And so that's part of the work of poetry. I mean, he was a laborer, and he wasn't part of the London elite except for about 2 years, when they thought he was really great and he was the flavor of the week. And then he kind of disappeared. And then just recently, about 100 of his poems, unpublished, unknown, were found someplace, and beautiful, amazing poems, and they're been published. So you just have to wait 100 years or so, you know. 100 years from now, you'll all be published, and you'll be, you'll be the talk of London. So I put below as a subtitle for this slide, the work of poetry, is consolation for those moments when you feel ill prepared for the privilege of living. I think that statement says a lot about where we are today and how important our writing is, and to continue the writing no matter what's going on around us or inside us. Consolation, comfort, another word for consolation. For those times when you might feel like you're not going to make it, or at least you're not ready for what the writer says, privilege of living. Sometimes it doesn't feel like a privilege, but it is. So I wanted to mention, I wanted this quote to be the kind of umbrella for this workshop. Is a poem entitled Possibilities by Wisława Szymborska. She was a Nobel Prize winning poet from Poland. She died in 2012. And she won the Nobel in 96, I believe. And this is one of her poems. Now, I think it's 29 lines long, not counting the title, which is Possibilities. And it just goes in lines. You'll have to, I think it'll show it, or I can show it, but you'll definitely be able, hopefully be able to hear it. And what I'm going to do, pay close attention, because I'm going to ask you to do a writing exercise after Amanda reads this. Amanda Palmer is her name, is a reader of Szymborska's poem. It's a little tough to get Szymborska to read right now her poem.
Possibilities.
Possibility.
I prefer movies. I prefer the oaks along the Warta. I prefer Dickens to Dostoevsky. I prefer myself liking people to myself loving mankind. I prefer keeping a needle and thread on hand just in case. I prefer the color green. I prefer not to maintain that reason is to blame for everything. I prefer exceptions. I prefer to leave early. I prefer talking to doctors about something else. I prefer the old fine-lined illustrations. I prefer the absurdity of writing poems to the absurdity of not writing poems. I prefer, where love's concerned, non-specific anniversaries that can be celebrated every day. I prefer moralists who promise me nothing. I prefer cunning kindness to the over-trustful kind. I prefer the earth in cities. I prefer conquered to conquering countries. I prefer having some reservations. I prefer the hell of chaos to the hell of order. I prefer Grimm's fairy tales to the newspaper's front pages. I prefer leaves without flowers to flowers without leaves. I prefer dogs with uncropped tails. I prefer light eyes, since mine are dark. I prefer desk drawers. I prefer many things that I haven't mentioned here to many things I've also left unsaid. I prefer zeros on the loose to those lined up behind a cipher. I prefer the time of insects to the time of stars. I prefer to knock on wood. I prefer not to ask how much longer and when. I prefer keeping in mind even the possibility that existence has its own reason for being.
So what I'd like you to do is actually fairly obvious, right? I would like each of you to, I'm gonna finish it here, but to start writing a poem. And this is good for prose writers to start writing a poem with the title I prefer. I prefer. We can all relate to that. We can all relate to some of the things that Wisława Szymborska was talking about. She was a really, really complex person, but an incredible poet. And her life was complex. But and I know this is a translation from the Polish to the English. I just want to say something quickly about translation. When you translate a poem from one language into another, you're creating a third piece of art. But at the same time, when you read a poem, if you're an English speaker and you read a poem in English, you're also translating it. You're translating it both emotionally, intellectually, and physiologically. And I want to talk about the physiology of it first. So I just want to point this out. When you are reading it aloud, you are using about 10 different functions of your throat and your speaking mechanisms. So when, I mean, you've got a larynx, a pharynx, a tongue, a throat, the top of your mouth, teeth, bottom, top teeth, the top, I said the top here. A lot of things working all at once. And you're translating the sound into a different sound. And that's pretty cool, actually. You know, you think about, you're creating different sound, and poetry is so much based on sound and music. It is music. Poetry, you're writing a song. I would say the most subversive and most authentic song is a poem. It's also the most, the one that might bring us the most consolation or comfort when we need it, to go back to that first slide. So if you would, in your own translation, write some lines, I'll give you just a few minutes, starting with "I prefer." And there's no judgment here. We're not going to make a book. I just want to give you time to practice. You know, we're busy. We don't have time to write, 12 hours a day. So please go ahead. What I'd like to do is just give you the opportunity. Some people don't look at it like it as an opportunity to read a partial poem done in 5 minutes in front of people. I'm looking for volunteers. Anybody that wants to read the poem, I'll ask you to stand up so that and speak towards the this computer. I want to. Well, I want to say one thing with these beginning poems. This beginning poem. One thing to do with it is to take it home and sit down wherever you write, or stand. Some people stand and write, and pick out the line that you like the best. Not necessarily the sentence, but the line that you like the best. And set everything else aside and take a new clean piece of paper and or computer. As you can tell, I use paper and pen or pencil before I'm ready to put it on computer. But anyway, take that line and start with it and just see what happens. I mean, the good thing about writing, especially poetry, I mean, you can delete, you can cross out, you can turn the page, you can throw it in the wastebasket. Wastebaskets are wonderful things. Besides practicing your basketball, you can get rid of bad poems. Okay, the first draft, we can call it what you just did, the first draft. Then you just release everything else and take the one line you like the best and continue the process as if it, you're continuing the possibilities, in other words. And so you write the line you like the best, and then whatever else comes to mind. And my hunch is that you'll go in different directions. And you also, if you're giving yourself open enough space, if your space is open enough inside, internally, you will you'll expand the meaning of the poem as well. You also, because I know you write prose, that could also lead into a short story or a novel. I mean, one line, John Steinbeck's East of Eden starts out with, "The Salinas River is in Northern California." I mean, so write "The Salinas River is in Northern California" and then go from there. Yeah, I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? You're pushing yourself is what you're doing, and challenging yourself to new words, new vocabulary, new thoughts, new territory. okay? It's like sending the sheep out into a new pasture, excuse me, pasture. There's risk there because it's new pasture and it's green and they might bloat up because it's early June in Montana. I've had the experience and it's a risk, which is what writing is in the first place. But so is life. Okay?
Funeral Blues by W.H. Orden. Stop all the clocks. Cut off the telephone. Prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. Silence the pianos and with muffled drum bring out the coffin. Let the mourners come. Let aeroplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crepe bows round the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can come to any good.
What I want to do is I want to play it again. It's just four stanzas. And I want you to listen. Want you to listen really carefully, just your ears. But I'll give you some rationale for doing what I'm doing. One of the things about writing, whether it's prose or poetry or creative nonfiction or limericks or erotic literature, whatever it is you're into, is that you need to be alert to the world around you. And Joseph Brodsky was a poet, was a Russian poet who came to the US and he didn't know any English, and he learned English. He was a really good poet. And he was in an interview one time, and the interviewer asked him, what do you miss most about not being in your home country, in Russia? What do you miss most? And he meant, that the interviewer meant, as a writer, what do you miss most? And Brodsky said, I miss hearing my own language. I miss overhearing conversation on the bus or on the train or on the subway or on the sidewalk. I miss hearing, sitting in a cafe and overhearing, a mother and a daughter talking in Russian. So that was the thing he missed. And so the alertness or how alert we are plays into our skill as a writer. So what I would like to ask you to do is just listen to the poem again, but listen for a word or a line. They're pretty short lines, and he goes slowly enough, right? I can slow it down.
Poems in a Time of Quarantine. Today we're reading Funeral Blues by W.H. Orden. Happy times. Orden wrote this in 1936 when he was 29. It was popularized in the modern era by the movie 4 Weddings and a Funeral. It was originally written in a slightly different form for a play he wrote with a fellow poet and sometimes lover, Christopher Isherwood. It chokes up anyone with a beating heart, so excuse me if I stumble. Funeral Blues. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. Let aeroplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put crepe bows around the waist and wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the woods. For nothing now can ever come to any good.
A word or a line from that poem that struck you or that you want to share? I wrote down, I thought that love would last forever. Now, I wrote that down because that line would easily be really, really corny if that's all they said, if that's all Orden said, and just talked about rainbows and unicorns. But that's not what he does. You know, he puts that line in there because that's what he meant to put in there. But in order to do the hard work of writing, you need to be able to distinguish between what I would call literary poetry and writing one verse, one draft of a poem from leisure or a poem as a hobbyist. It needs, like this line, I thought that love would last forever. It needs help. And so as writers, what we need to do is figure out what lines need help. So keep the line that you wrote, or the lines or line or words that you wrote down, keep them with you. And I don't know how the rest of you write, but I have notebooks like this. It's just from Walgreens. And I just keep writing in them. And I even have a note from my niece in California that says, I love you. I keep that. But you know, you can just go from page to page to page and back and go, and you can go, you know, a year back. And so just collect these valuable resources. Write every day, but I would have a piece of paper or something, and yeah, or write on my hand. There are different ways to do it. What I would like you to do is eventually, when you have time, is start putting the pieces of the poems, fragments that you've come up with, start putting them together and see what you come up with. That's one strategy to write with. A female Iraqi American poet who is actually still alive, Dunya Nikaya, wrote that, quote, poetry is not medicine, it's an X-ray. So one of the things I want to try to get across is you will surprise yourself. That's kind of that's part of the idea. Surprising yourself as you write. It's like walking down the street and turning a corner you don't know what's around the corner. And so part of that quote gives me a sense of surprise. If you've ever seen an x-ray of your own, if you've broken your arm or something, you've seen an x-ray of it, and it's a surprise. I mean, to me, it would be a surprise. I've never broken a bone, but I've had CT scans before, so I see slices of my brain, which is really interesting. But it's surprising. Part of what Dunya Mikhail is saying, I believe, is that we don't write poetry to feel better. We don't write poetry to make ourselves well. We don't write poetry necessarily. And I'll say, Richard Hugo told me one thing. He said, the whole class, every class he taught, he said, you come into this class and you listen to what I have to say, and I tell you blah, 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 blah. Now, when you leave the class, forget everything I told you, and you're on your own. So don't take this as the last word in poetry. But a lot of us, at least, especially at first, we try to write poetry that's going to make us feel good, or that's going to, especially if we're in junior high school, it's going to make another person like us. I don't know if that still happens anymore, but it's not a medicinal process. It can be a cleansing process. It's not necessarily. It's not really. It is an intellectual process, but it's also a heart process. But it's not something that we do, at least from my standpoint, and I think that's what Billy is getting to. It's actually going to do this the opposite. I mean, instead of being medicine for you, you're going to see yourself in different ways, or you're going to see the world perhaps in different ways. And so, if we're hoping to be healed and be happy, and that poetry is going to, poetry just has this bad name of being the healer. And I mean healer in a really superficial way. There are ways that poetry can heal. I'm not saying that. I'm not denying that. But I do want to emphasize the fact that it's an X-ray. It's digging deeper and deeper. It's like I told my therapist the other day. Actually, I've told her for years. Yes, I see a therapist. Okay. I said, I'm really tired of people saying, I bought your book, I read your poem, I just don't get it. And I said, I'm just really tired of it. And I don't know what they're doing. She said, she was wonderful. She said, it's because they don't work at it. You don't just read a poem once. You read a poem over and over. If you're interested in it, if you don't get it, it's like anything else you don't get. You work at it. If you don't get an algebra problem, which I never got, 9th grade at General George S. Patton Junior High School at Fort Leavenworth, in 9th grade, I didn't get algebra. I got a C. I guess I suppose I got a C. That was lucky. But if you don't get it, you keep working at it. Hence the work of poetry. So you can examine the direction you're going. Poetry uses, if it's written well, it uses different kinds of devices for literary tools, like metaphor, simile, imagery, which is also used in prose, but everything is much more intense. Yeah, I'm not sure anybody has a really great answer. That's why there are bunches of answers. Like when I read prose, I don't necessarily feel like I'm reading something that's an X-ray. I feel like I'm reading something that's a description. I'm not reading possibilities. No, when I'm reading possibilities, I'm reading a poem. In many ways, it is up to the reader how they might translate that into prose. There's a thin line sometimes between the two. For instance, Gate A4 by Naomi Shihab Nye. A lot of people categorize that as a poem. I teach it as a short story, even though it's about a page long. But I don't see it as a poem. I see it as a short story. But sometimes it's anthologized along with poems. But it's a beautiful story. Gate A4 by Naomi Nye, N-Y-E. And Zimborska has a whole, if you Google Wisława Zimborska, you'll see how, sorry folks, if you Google Zimborska, you'll find some of her writings about fairy tales and the need for fear and what it does in our childhood and how it actually strengthens our writing. And the power of mystery and Grimm's fairy tales. I mean, they're frightening. They're frightening like things in the Bible are frightening. I mean, you know, the death of every kid under 2 is a pretty frightening non-fairy tale. You know? So I try to be somewhat of an iconoclast in terms of how we've been taught in school and what we really need to learn, and just in literature, not in terms of religion and politics and all that, but in terms of literature, oftentimes we've been sold a bill of goods. And I've spent since 1967 trying to fix it. A book that's really short is called The Triggering Town. The Triggering Town, T-O-W-N, written by Richard Hugo. And it's just a compilation of his classroom notes and lectures. But I believe that the Eastern European poets, like the South American poets, any place other than the United States, research it, broaden the, it's like traveling, you know, get out of the United States and read something, even if it's in translation, read it. Eastern European poets, Zimborska, and there's a bunch more. The Russian poets, Akhmatova, read her stuff. Tsetsuyeva, read her stuff. So here I've put up a quote. Whatever inspiration is, it's born from a continuous I don't know. I just think that's important to keep in mind. I don't know what you think, but that's what I believe this. It always seems to go there, you know. So whatever inspiration is, it's born yeah, you got I figured I'd provide my own applause. Poetry, not leisure or a hobby, is 10 to 15% inspiration or the muse, question mark, and 85 to 90% hard work. This doesn't come because I do write every day, even if it's a word in this notebook or on a paper napkin in a cafe or someplace. So the discipline, to me at least, is really important. Other people would disagree, which is fine. But this is the last slide, but I want to, we have 4 minutes. I want you to remember this, please. It's the work of poetry. Okay, this is a poet by the name of Jane Hirschfield. She also is a great poet. And she has a book of essays about poetry called Nine Gates, but she also has a bunch of volumes of poems. And this is a poem that I really just wanted to finish with.
Jane Hirschfield was born in New York. She graduated from Princeton in 1973, the first class to include women, published her first poem soon thereafter. She spent 3 years in a Zen monastery in California. She is a practicing Buddhist.
For what binds us? There are names for what binds us. Strong forces, weak forces. Look around, you can see them. The skin that forms in a half-empty cup, nails rusting into the places they join, joints dovetailed on their own weight. The way things stay so solidly wherever they've been set down. And gravity, scientists say, is weak. And see how the flesh grows back across a wound with a great vehemence, more strong than the simple, untested surface before. There's a name for it on horses when it comes back darker and raised. Proud flesh. As all flesh is proud of its wounds, wears them as honors given out after battle, small triumphs pinned to the chest. And when two people have loved each other, see how it is like a scar between their bodies, stronger, darker, and proud. How the black cord makes of them a single fabric that nothing can tear or mend.
Thank you, Mike, so much. It's been really, really helpful and lasting.